Hey, so we come to that slightly difficult Beatles album, the one that many fans consider a bit of a retreat, bit of an odd man out album. This is the Beatles For Sale, of course. It was released on December 4th of 1964 in England, and over in America, songs on this album were spread out over 3 or 4 albums on Capitol. It went to number one for 11 weeks or so in England. The albums in America, of course, went to number one, two over here. This is the one that a lot of Beatle fans, when they're ranking the albums in order of preference, tends to end up toward the bottom of the list. It has its fans, but it also has a lot of people that sort of put this one down towards the bottom. And I think some of the criticism is fair in that respect, and some of it isn't. I've point out that this is their fourth album that they released in 21 months, which is just amazing when you think about it. These bands nowadays, and really for the past 30 or more years, tend to release, they go 2, 3, 4, 5 years between album releases, and that's not at all unusual. But they really did crank them out back in those days, not only the Beatles, but the Rolling Stones and the Kinks and plenty of the other bands that were around in the 60s. So it kind of shows on the cover there. They look a little bit worn out, a little bit tired. And so this gets a little bit of stick because it's heavy on covers. There's 14 songs, 6 of them are covers. The album before this, A Hard Day's Night, was the band's first album of all original material. So they when you think about it, I've got several books that have lists of all the concerts the Beatles ever played, and you look at 63 and 64 and you see that they're playing 200, 250 concerts a year for a couple of years there. In between that, they're going in the studio where they're writing songs, and they're going in the studio to record songs, and they're making a movie, and they're making personal appearances and interviews on TV and radio, and being on different TV shows to perform their songs. And somewhere in there, you figure they had to have some time with their self and their families. And the fact that they were able to churn out albums of such high quality in the middle of all that is pretty astonishing, I think. And while this album has its detractors, I also think that it's still one of the best albums in 1964. I would put Hard Day's Night above this personally, but if this had been any other band, this would be, hailed as a masterpiece. And it's the Beatles. It is hailed as a masterpiece to some extent, but it's just seen as one of the band's lesser efforts. But like I said, it's pretty amazing that in the midst of all that Beatlemania and constant work and activity, that they're able to put out anything near the quality of this. But so yeah, this is they started recording this a month after Hard Day's Night. The album came out. There was reading some stuff on the internet there, and I think it was an interview with Tony Asher or Mal Evans or one of those guys several years after the fact, saying that, like a mid-70s interview, saying that it's inconceivable that a band would come off of a major U.S. tour playing dozens of cities and go straight into the recording studio and begin a new album as soon as they got home. And in the middle of that, they're doing concert dates around England and Europe while they're writing songs and recording songs and doing TV appearances and all that. But that's what they did in those days. And so I don't know. Maybe that's a better thing. Maybe that pressure cooker environment is what led to some of the greatest music ever made in the 60s from the Beatles and all those other great bands. Because nowadays, people take 3 or 4 years between albums, and most of the music that comes out nowadays is kind of crap. So who knows? But obviously the treadmill of fame and just constant activity was probably wearing on the band a little bit at this point. There's probably no probably about it. and it shows in the music. The music's a little more downbeat than it had been on the first three albums. It's it's a very somber, very autumn feel to the album to me, which is one reason I've always kind of liked it. Um, but all that said, and I do love this album, and I do pull it out and play it, but it is probably the Beatles album that I play the least, with the possible exception of the Yellow Submarine soundtrack. This is one that I kind of have to be in the mood for, whereas the others I can pretty much play anytime. I mean, I get in the mood for different ones at different times, but this one I sort of do have to be in the mood for. But when I am, it's sort of a nothing else will do type album. Great cover, if I didn't already mention that. Iconic photo on the front there, of course. The back's equally neat picture there. First album of theirs with a gatefold. If you don't count the Beatles Story Capitol album. Neat picture inside. I always like that picture of them standing in front of that wall of whatever that is. And then nice little live shot down there. So this was the singles I Feel Fine and She's a Woman came out roughly around the same time as this. The album might have benefited from having those two songs on here. But what we got is what we got. So I'm going to go ahead and list them in my order of preference. 14 songs, like I said. I'll start with number 14. I went with Kansas City. Not a song that I dislike, but not one that I really go out of my way to listen to too often. It's a cover, and as such, I mean, a lot of the Beatles covers, like I said in earlier videos, are great, and they really make them their own. This song was kind of a hit, I believe, sort of an obvious song. Paul has fun with it. It's nice. There's no great shakes to it. I do kind of like when it switches into a little bit of that Hey, Hey, Hey song, which was a Little Richard song. And funny thing about that is that the album came out, and I don't remember when it was, but it was probably not until the 90s or something that Little Richard's publishers or manager or whoever noticed that Hey, 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 that little snippet of that was on there, and they had never been credited or received royalties for 30 or so years of album sales. So the Beatles or Capitol or someone had to pay Little Richard's company a nice little chunk of change there in the late 80s, mid 90s, whenever that was discovered. So that was a nice Christmas gift for him, I suppose. So yeah, Kansas City, it's okay. Next, number 13, I've got Babies in Black. It's not a bad song. It's one of the rare instances of a Beatles song that sort of just feels like filler. I know they played it. They must have liked it somewhat because they played it in concert quite a bit. Maybe it was just an easy song to play, but it does sound to me like something where they were in a situation where they needed another song to fill out the album and just toss something off pretty quick. And it's Beatley sounding and all, but it's one of those that if I pay attention to it when I do, which is rarely, it's not a bad song. Usually, though, when I play the album, it just sort of flies right past me, and it's okay, but no great shakes. This is sort of a there song. Number 12, I've got I'm a Loser. Great Lennon vocal. Lennon, of course, the Dylan influence coming in here. And it's a good song. It's a little depressing, which, I mean, is kind of the point of the song, so that's almost silly to say. It's a little better than Babies in Black, but to me it's always been sort of just a there song that, I don't know, it's alright. Number 11, I've got Honey Don't, one of the two Carl Perkins songs. This is a Ringo, of course. Ringo always did good with the country stuff, this and Act Naturally, and his Bukus of Blues albums. He ought to try to do another country album of the old country songs from the way back days. I think he's having fun here. Got a nice bit of energy to it. Clips along. It's a nice song. It's filler cover, of course, but it's a good one. Number 10, I've got yet another cover. This is Rock and Roll Music. This is one that they probably just again, needed something else to fill out the album, and went in and said, let's do that, and just tossed it off. I love it, though. It's a great song. It's not the Beatles' greatest or anything, and they didn't write it, but it's Chuck Berry did it originally, and it's Lennon's just great vocal. It sounds like he's having a ball. I love some of the lines in it, just the energy, and even though it's just a filler, just a toss off for the band, it's they sound like they're having a lot of fun. Lennon in particular, just belting it out, and it's infectious. It's good. I like it. Number 9, Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby. This is one that some people probably put down towards the bottom, and it's another one that's not their greatest by any means, but it's Beatley sounding enough, and it moves along. It's a pretty song. It's a nice song. I don't know what else to say about that. Number 8, What You're Doing. I always like this one. I like the Ringo's drums, which I call sort of the stair step effect. The doom, 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 just sounds like, I don't know, I just call it the stair step effect. It's what it reminds me of for some reason. I like the piano part where the piano comes back in, kind of neat. Vocals, of course, good. Number 7, this is one that a lot of people rate as their least favorite Beatles song. This or Revolution 9, Mr. Moonlight. Cover 2. I've heard the original. I don't remember who did it originally, but kind of like it. It's a little bit different, but Lennon makes it his own. I like it. I love the vocal. I love the I guess it's an organ in the middle of it, solo that's kind of cool and kind of cheesy at the same time. The sort of overwrought vocals in it, and it's not a great song, but he's having a lot of fun singing it. And I just always liked it. I thought it was cool, and I know a lot of people don't like it. I Don't Want to Spoil the Party is number 6. Just I like the vocal of it, and kind of another downbeat song that's in the mood of the most of the album there, but it's a good one. Every Little Thing is number 5. Can't really think of too much to say about that. It's just a nice song. Kind of like that, like the percussion in it. I'll Follow the Sun comes in at number 4. It's a Paul song's one of his nice ballads, where a lot of Paul's ballads seem to be kind of little cheesy, but sometimes he just hits the right pitch, and this is one of those cases where he does that. It's a good song, good ballad. No Reply comes in at number 3. A little more energetic than This Boy, but I always kind of thought of this as sort of a cousin of This Boy, or a brother of This Boy or something. It's sort of connected in some way thematically to me. This Boy's a better song, but this is a really good one. I always like this one. Number 2 is the last of the covers on the album, is Words of Love, the Buddy Holly song. Love Buddy Holly's version. It's one of my favorite songs of his. Love the Beatles, which they do it pretty close to the original, but they just do such a good job of it, and the vocals are so great. I always really like that one. And of course, number 1, What's Left, is the hit single 8 Days a Week. Just one of the kind of out of character on the album, because it's such an upbeat song compared to everything else on here. Maybe rock and roll music is upbeat, but Kansas City too, I guess. But yeah, just a great hit single, and the hand claps, the guitar, the vocals. Always love that one, and know that it's one that John Lennon, in his 1980 interviews, said he didn't like. I don't know whether he didn't like it because it sort of sounds like their early Beatles sound at the time when the band was moving on to something else, and so he thought it was just something that it was supposed to be. Help was originally going to be called 8 Arms to Hold You, so there was some thought that that might have been the theme song to Help originally, so it might have been something that he just tossed off because he knew he had to write something for the movie. And but I love the song. It does sound sort of the final parting gift of that early Beatles sound before they would move on to other directions, and this album is sort of an indicator that they were ready to move on into different directions and not just repeat themselves over and over and keep making with the Beatles or Hard Day's Night. Not that there's anything wrong with that. The early Beatles stuff is my favorite part of their career on most days, even though I love it all. But yeah, so I can see where John probably thought this is just repeating ourselves type song and wasn't that crazy about it. But I always really liked it. So there you go. And I'll be back with the next album.